Howdy, everyone. I am your host, Michael Hingson, or Mike Hingson is fine. And this is Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. We get to deal a lot with the unexpected today. So our guest is Dennis Dowdell, and Dennis started life in a professional way as a bus driver, did that for about 5 years, and then decided to make a choice that kind of changed a lot of stuff. And we'll get to that. But first of all, I want to welcome you, Dennis, and thank you for being here with us.
Well, thanks, Mike. And what a great joy to be on your podcast. And especially after having looked at your background and watched some of your previous programs and read a bit about your history, it's a thrill to be here, be with you.
Well, thank you. It's, we all get confronted by various things, and I can say that all the things that have happened to me, I can trace back to choices that I've made, and that's fine. I love to be able to be introspective and look at things and know why I got where I am, even though some of it came about from things that I certainly didn't expect were going to happen.
Well, that's true. And I think that's part of, just learning to deal with life. I always say life's a test and a trust. It's a test with the things that you do know, and it's a trust with the things you don't know and they're out of your control,
Which is more than even the test, because there is so much that is out of our control. Would that we only would accept that.
Right. It's a tough mindset to establish.
Yeah.
But it's a good one.
It is. Well, let's start by kind of the early Dennis. Tell us a little bit about you growing up and that kind of stuff.
Well, I tell you, I grew up with a family. I had 3 siblings, an older sister, younger sister, and an older brother. And, for me, life was great. I mean, I think I had the most incredible life growing up. I never really realized I was poor. But my mom and dad were incredible. My dad would be considered my most unforgettable character. For me, life was just grand, and I learned a lot. And my dad was probably my first real mentor in life, and probably set a foundation for me to be able to consume the rest of the things that I have over the years. And my brother died in the Vietnam War. That was a turning point, just realizing, okay, the unexpected happens, the unwanted happens, that will affect you for the rest of your life. For me, I was going to make a career in the military. And after that had happened, my mom said, well, Dennis, she said, listen, she said, you can still make a career in the Marine Corps. They can kill you or I'll kill you. And I said, don't worry, Mom, I'm not going in that direction. So that caused me to have to, look at a whole different career and look at life a little bit differently. And so it was very interesting, just to see how things went from there. But as I look back, the 2020 hindsight, had that not happened, my life could be entirely different. And I wouldn't have made nearly the impact that I think that I had.
So were you drafted into the military to go and go to Vietnam, or?
No, actually my brother volunteered.
Uh-huh.
And he went, but when he died, I was considered sole surviving son.
Ah.
So therefore I was, void of the draft. And so I didn't have to deal with that. So, so I went on to college, didn't do very well. But even though I didn't do well in classes, it was still a great education.
What did you major in, or did you?
I majored in public speaking and psychology and Bible.
Wow. Where did you go to college?
Hope University. It's a little school out in Fullerton, California, right across the street from Cal State Fullerton, right across the street. We shared the dormitories.
My brother went to Cal State Fullerton. I went to UC Irvine, so I was 30, 40 miles south, but
yeah.
But he went to Fullerton and majored in art, and then ended up going into and joined the federal police force and ended up going to work for the Department of Customs. So
and then,
go figure.
It's interesting, Mike, and when people go through a college education, it's interesting. I think it's a large percentage of people don't go into the field of their degree unless it was more of a, you know, uh, job related type, electrician type of thing. But really what I got out of college, and I would do it again, even though I didn't do well in school, I would do it again for the discipline, for the relationships that I developed, and the fact that I finished. And so the discipline to get through. And I think that's really what most people look for. They just want to know, they don't care what you studied, but did you finish?
Yeah. And the issue is that that is how I view college. And I know not everyone necessarily does. And I did okay in college. I had a 3.54 GPA as an undergraduate and did better as a graduate student. And I majored in physics and wanted to teach. But like with everything, other things did occur along the way, including I was offered a position with the National Federation of the Blind that started in 1976, but I learned about it 2 years before. This guy named Ray Kurzweil, who was a futurist and an inventor, a scientist, had developed technology that would actually be able to, and at that time it wasn't like you took a snapshot, it scanned a page of print line by line. He didn't care what type style or type styles were on the page, called omnifont optical character recognition, but the machine and the technology would recognize the characters. And he decided that the first application that he wanted to put his machine to was reading material for blind people, because we didn't have access to printed material, of course. Right. So the Federation, the National Federation of the Blind, and Ray developed a project where we worked to get foundation funding and buy a bunch of the machines, 5 of them, $50,000 each, and put them around the country for blind people to use and make recommendations that we assembled into a report that we sent back to Ray in 1978 saying, here's what we really need to put into the machine that would go into your production model. Wow. And I was hired to be the day-to-day coordinator of that, literally traveling throughout the country, living in hotels out of suitcases for 18 months. And I wouldn't trade that for anything, although I was getting a little crazy by the time it was over. Then I went to work for Ray doing the same things and did that for about 8 months, and then was called into the office of the VP of marketing, and who said, we're laying you off because in reality, you're not a revenue producer, although we love what you're doing, but it's not as important as we got to generate money to keep the company going. So we have to hire more people to produce revenue. So we have to lay you off unless you'll go into sales. And not only go into sales, we don't want you to sell the reading machine for the blind. We want you to sell the commercial, more high-end version that we just developed called the Kurzweil data entry machine. And I chose to do that, having moved to Boston and, well, living in Winthrop, Mass, and working in Ray's office in Cambridge. And I realized that the unemployment rate among employable blind people then pretty much still is now was 70%. With that kind of rate, it's not that we can't work, it's people decided that we couldn't work and still decide we can't work and don't give blind people the chance. Well, anyway, I went into sales and did that. And that, of course, led to all sorts of other things, which eventually led to the World Trade Center, which led to me becoming a keynote speaker 22 years ago and having a lot of fun doing that as well, and now getting to do this podcast. But yeah, we make choices, things happen to us. I really wanted to become a teacher. And what I realized, especially once I started selling, although it even happened before then, was sales for the best salespeople is really teaching. That's and right. I've always been a teacher, and I continue to be a teacher and absolutely love it. And for me, college did exactly the same thing as you. I did okay, but at the same time, the discipline, the mindset, the experience, I couldn't trade it for anything in the world.
It's so true. And that's, of course, your GPA was about double what mine was. but I got all the other stuff out of it. I didn't get the grades, but I got everything else you're talking about. And it's really been a tremendous asset for my career. And I so agree, the whole idea is we're all teaching somebody something. The question is, what are we teaching them? And, and do they need it? Do they want it? And if they need it and want it, then, that's, to me, that's sales. Sales is just helping people to get what they want.
Right. Well, so you went off and went to college and learned the things you learned. And then where'd you go from there?
Well, it was pretty interesting because I've always been a loyal person. And, when I got out of college, interestingly, it was a Christian college. And
Yeah.
so all of my close, intimate friends, there was about a dozen of us that continued to meet on an annual basis for 22 years after we graduated. But every single one of them either became a pastor or married one. And I was the only one who didn't. I didn't want to, even though I won a lot of the speaking contests, right? I just didn't want to. I didn't want to be trapped, have to be someplace every Sunday. And so I wanted to travel the world. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take some time. And that's when I started driving the bus and just kind of look around to see what's out there, because I didn't want to get a job. I wanted to get a career. I wanted to find something that I could be involved with that would make a difference for people, but would allow me to travel the world. And lo and behold, I'm coming up to my 30th birthday, and I better get on with this thing, or I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss. So I got real serious about the search. Stumbled across a startup company, and the nutrition industry, Herbalife International.
Mm,
The company was only 2 months old,
right.
4 months old, and so I didn't really know a whole lot. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about nutrition. But he talked about making a difference and traveling the world. And I said, whatever I got to do to make a difference and travel the world, I'll learn. And since then, I've been to 51 countries on 5 different continents, and the stories and the testimonies that I've heard back from people from literally around the world, it's been amazing. And and it's kind of like you were saying, alluding to, but when you love what you do, you never work another day. Mike, I haven't worked in 43 years.
I hear you. So what continents haven't you been to?
Antarctica, South Pole, and let's see, there's 7 of them. Yeah, so those are the 2. The other 5 I've been to.
Well, South Pole is not a continent, but Australia?
No, I've been to Australia. Well, whatever. Now, my geography. See, this is why I didn't do well in school.
Well, how come you're not finding Herbalife in Antarctica? Come on, it'd be well preserved there.
It's slow, I mean, it could turn out to be very useful. They're not growing a lot of vegetables up there, that's for sure.
No, they're not. That is certainly true, and it does get cold there.
Yeah. So I did, and when I started, and it's interesting how you got into sales, because when I saw the presentation, I saw them draw little squares and circles, and I thought, oh, Gads, this is some kind of sales. And I thought, I don't like sales, don't want sales, not doing sales. See you later. Only problem was the room was so crowded, I couldn't get out. And fortunately for me, I couldn't get out, because when Mark said about making a difference in traveling the world, I said, okay, I got to learn more. And I just told him, I said, Mark, I hate sales. And he says, well, don't you work with college kids? And I said, well, yeah, I did some, coaching, mentoring, discipling with college kids. And he said, well, what do you do with them? And I said, I just help them kind of deal with life, solve problems. And he said, well, do they have weight problems? Do they have financial problems? I said, Mark, they're in college. I said, the freshman 15, the freshman 30. I said, what college student doesn't have financial problems? Of course they do. And he says, now you have 2 more problems to solve. And Mike, the penny dropped. I thought, whoa. I mean, that was a turning point. I thought, I never have to sell anything. All I have to do is help people solve a problem they have up to that point in time in their life not been able to solve. And so that was it. And that's what I did. And then I realized, as I was building a team, because that's what, that industry is all about, the multi-level industry, it's about building a team. And I thought, building a team is just mentoring. It's just discipleship. And I knew how to do that. It was just building people. And so once I got that, I was off and running. I figured, man, all I got to do is disciple somebody, teach them to disciple somebody, and the duplication process, it continues.
Yeah. So how long have you been married now?
Great question. I didn't get married till I was 60. So we're coming up on 13 years now.
Okay, so you did marry a pastor. I'm sure she preaches at you. Come on.
Well, yeah, she does more than preach, man. She preaches and whips.
Yeah, well, so she's a very involved pastor.
She is absolutely amazing. I'll tell you, an amazing woman. And she had to be for me to bite the bullet and dive into this new venture when I was 60 years old for the first time.
Well, congratulations by any standard.
People say, well, why didn't you get married before then? And I said, well, I would have, and it wasn't that I couldn't find the right one. And it's just that I had to become the right one. And it took a long time. I was too busy running around the world having fun.
Well, I think there's truth to that. I know that when Karen and I got married in 1982, as we always said it, we were older and mature enough to know what we wanted in a person, and it just clicked. And so we were married for 40 years when she passed last November. But by the same token, I understand exactly where you're coming from. And sometimes it has to be exactly that way. And you've got to become the right person. Otherwise, it's not going to work either.
That's right. I mean, for me, it's always personal responsibility. I don't have any control over what anyone else does, says, or thinks. But I do have control of how I respond to it. And I do have control of what I'm going to do. And so I got to put my efforts on what I have control of, not what I don't have control of.
Well, exactly right. And if we worry, as we've talked about a lot on this podcast, if we spend our time worrying about the things that we can't control, we'll drive ourselves crazy.
Right. And a lot of people are.
And a lot of people are. There is truth and merit to that by any standard. But congratulations, you newlywed, you.
Oh, thank you. Listen, I still feel like a newlywed, and it's interesting. Some days it feels like I've only been married for a few months, and other days it feels like I've been married for a few decades.
Yeah. And we felt that way, and wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
We love to talk to each other. We love to communicate, and we could argue, but we could always get through it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the growth process, and I think really, especially when you're going through arguments, that's when the real love is developed. It's easy to love the lovely, but to love the person who's not happy with you at the moment, that takes another level of discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you continue to do Herbalife today?
Yeah, I primarily am involved in the training and coaching. I don't really do any team development. My team's already developed.
Yeah.
It's the dream come true. I live on my residuals. They've been extremely stable for many, many decades. And so it's opened up the opportunity for me to now expand my horizons on my training platform to be able to get outside of my company and reach out to other people, organizations, and companies to share the things that help me to develop my team around the world.
And that is kind of really cool. So you continue to get to be a teacher. That's
right. And it's people say, well, why don't you just retire? And I said, man, if I retired, I'd have to retire to do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you retire to do what you love, and I'm already doing it. So, I just, what can you do? You just have to go.
Where's the fun in retiring when you're having fun doing what you do?
And, it's so true. It really is. And that's been, and as we were talking about earlier, after my brother died and there was a complete change, or I was going to have to change my career because I'd spent years, with the mindset of going into the military. And the question is how long would it take me to become a general? And, so there was a whole different twist. And after that, I had to figure, okay, well then what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And when I fell into this, it was like if I had to write the perfect job description, this is it. I mean, it fulfills all the categories. And so it's just been absolutely amazing. And I think what that does, and it's a part of the mindset. And I have a whole section in my book about mindset. And I think part of the mindset that's been so valuable for me, and I no doubt it has been that way for you, is that I've got the mindset that nothing happens to me, everything happens for me. And I just have to figure out what it's for. So there's a lesson, whether it's good or whether it's bad, there's a lesson that's going to be beneficial for my future. And so that's been my mindset, regardless of what the circumstances are.
Wow. And it doesn't get any better than that. And clearly you have been successful at what you do, whatever that means. So what does it mean to, I'm assuming that you view yourself as having been successful. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, that has a wide spectrum of answers.
Sure.
To it. But, I think the first part of the idea of success, and I think there's levels of it, but I think the first definition of success for me is just living life according to my values. So that whatever I do, if I can do it without compromising my values, I have success, whether I make a lot of money or not, whether I have a lot of position or possessions or not. If I can live according to my values, that's a level of success. But then when I look at, people want to measure success. A lot of people like to measure it with money, position, possessions. I like to measure my success based on people. And because success really isn't as much what I do, that's my accomplishments. That's not my success. My success isn't what I do, it's what others do as a result of what I do. In other words, if I can teach, as we talked about, if I can impact a person's life where their life is better, where they can make a bigger impact on their society, on their culture, on their community, then to me, that's success. And so that's the thing that I love, because success can be fleeting if you measure it in many other ways, the way most of the world does. If you can have rich, fame, and fortune, but look at how many people have the riches and fame and fortune and commit suicide. So the success wasn't that real beneficial. See, it wasn't that satisfying. And besides, what you earn, what you develop, what you create today can be gone tomorrow. But the thing is, the impact you have on people isn't gone. Things and money can disappear, but people don't. They last for as long as they live. See, and then they can impact those, the next generation. So that's why it's very satisfying, to have that concept of success for me. And it helps me so that I don't have to worry about competing with other people. I just have to compete with the guy in the mirror every day.
Yeah. Well, and success is ought, or at least ought to be, a lot to do with satisfaction and the fact that what you want. I think that's part of the issue. People talk about success and they want to have a lot of money and things like that. I wonder if they really know what they want and if they've taken the time to intellectualize and think about what they want. And as a result, do they know what's really going to satisfy them?
Right. Well, that's true. And I think that's when, especially when you're coaching with people, you got to get beyond that, what's your measure of success? Well, to have $1 million in the bank, and I said, okay, but why do you want the $1 million in the bank? What's that going to do for you? And, and why do you want that? You do that why question 6-8 times and you kind of get down to maybe the root, driving force, that they're really looking to accomplish. I know a lot of people, they reach the goal. They say, I want to own my own company and I want to own 3 houses, one in the mountains, one in the ocean, and one in the, in the suburban areas and stuff like this. And so they drive through and they reach their goal, but they want all those things so that they can have an exciting family life and enjoy, everything that's going on around them. But in the process of getting there, they lose their family. They get a divorce. Their kids don't like them because they spent their entire lives at work and doing all that stuff. So they reach the goal and they miss the objective.
Yeah.
What a tragedy.
I've decided I would like $4 million in the bank. Why? It's a cushion. And that's it. Not to spend.
Hey, Mike, you'll love this. So the founder of our company, 9th grade educated kid, right? ninth grade educated kid, had all kinds of problems, stuff like that, started from zero, became the hero, started the company. It's a $9 billion company from ninth grade educated kid. We're at this fundraiser, and there's all kinds of politicians, movie stars, Hollywood, Olympic athletes, and all these rich and famous people. And then there's a handful of us guys from the company, from Herbalife, and we're out under the gazebo, and he's talking to us, and he says, one of these days, the Herbalife distributors are going to get rich. And I looked at him and I said, Mark, what are you talking about? I said, there's a lot of Herbalife distributors, kind of getting rich. I said, well, what do you mean by rich? And he says, like $1 million a year. And I said, well, Mark, we got a few guys who are approaching that $1 million a year. And he said, no. Interest only.
Yeah.
I said, oh yeah, that's your cushion, Mike. That's the cushion,
Yeah.
$1 million in interest only.
If I had $4 million in the bank, I'd have enough of a cushion. I'd be very happy. I'm not greedy, but I hear exactly what you're saying. And that's the point, isn't it?
That's right.
Now, I wouldn't mind $1 million interest a year, but that's okay. I'm not so greedy that I need to have it, but Karen and I had our financial ups and downs. And so I value a cushion, but I also know that even more important than having that $4 million in the bank up front is knowing that I'm doing something good. I'm accomplishing something. I'm helping people. And I know that $4 million over time will come. We've had to spend money over the years so that we haven't had a lot of cushion, but now that's even starting to turn around a little bit, which is good.
Well, it is good. And, and interesting, perspective here from one of my mentors is he's an executive mentor for senior executives around the world and mostly here in the US, but I mean, he's a brilliant guy. And he talked about the impact of each decade in our life.
Mm-hmm.
What the first decade is a decade of security. And then when you get into the second decade in your teens, that's the decade of being self-aware. And then the third decade in your 20s is the decade of survival. Okay, you graduated from school or college and you're now getting into the work world and how am I going to survive? And then the 30s, you learn to survive. And so that 30s is a decade of success. And then you succeed and you say, so what? And so the decade of the 40s is, so what? In other words, what's the significance of it all? How can I be significant rather than successful? And then the 50s, once you get that significance, you say, okay, I got it. And so now you can begin 50s, get your stride. And when you get your stride going, now you begin developing, get that security going, right? The establishment. And then your 60s. And he told me this when I was in my 60s. And he's always been very keen to talk to me about things that are relevant for my present time. And he said, Benny, he said, did you know that in your 60s, it's the most profitable decade in a man's life?
Mm-hmm.
Because he knows how to survive. He knows how to succeed. He knows what's significant. He's developed his stride. And so now he can strategize to capitalize on his whole life. And so it's one of the most profitable and successful decades in a man's life. And then in the 70s, that's where I am now.
I was just going to ask that, being there as well.
Yeah. So in the 70s, he said the 70s is the decade of succession. Okay, you've got it all, you've done it all. What are you going to do with it all? You're not going to be able to take it with you. So who's going to succeed you? Who's going to take over? And that's how he got me to write my book.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's a way for me to leave a legacy, to leave all that I've learned, or at least a lot of what I've learned, to, my family and friends and other people so that they can see. So it's very interesting,
Well, it is. And it makes a lot of sense if you go back and trace it.
Yeah.
And again, as you go through each of those decades, as you go through each of the things that you ponder, and if you truly do ponder it, you also discover how to tweak it along the way and how to enhance it. And that's important too.
Exactly. That's it. Well, and that's why, there's always so much, people they kind of wonder, when you're starting a new business and you just started your 74th year and you're starting a new business. And I said, yeah, man, what better time? I said, listen, I've got all this stuff. What am I going to do with it? And let's get it out there. Let's do something. And I think that so many people, and especially, in the elderly category, and I hate to classify them, I don't feel that way, but I think statistically, they put me there. I don't feel there, but put me there, right? But it's that sense of being useful and valuable and needed. And nobody needs us and our years of experience and knowledge than the youth. And so we're so valuable, and we need to invest ourselves in other people, and especially the youth, especially the grandkids and the great grandkids and that type of thing, because they're not getting a lot of what we've been through, the things that have enabled us to overcome and develop, that unstoppable mindset that you talk about.
Well, the issue is, of course, that with every successive generation, technology and other things have made life easier. But there is something to be said for being in a position, or putting yourself in a position, or others putting you in a position where you do have to experience some of the things that you want in a way that you have to really work to get them, because just getting them handed to you, it goes back to Jesus. I would rather teach people to fish than give them a fish. And it is all about what we need to do. And the fact is that we do have to all learn to strive. I think human beings love, deep down, whether they recognize it or not, a challenge. And unfortunately, we have forgotten how to give maybe a lot of people the challenges that they really ought to have.
Mike, that's so true. And I mean, listen, we both can think of it. We're on the same page here in that, if somebody gives you something, that's why they say if somebody gives you something, you don't tend to take care of it. But if you had to work your tail off and work months and save money and go through the hardships to finally get something, listen, you take great care of it. And when you have to work real hard for something, it feels so good when you get it.
Right.
When you made it, it's just like, okay, I want to get to this position, not for the position, but for the person that it makes of me. Yeah. The position's nothing, but what it creates in me, what it develops in me, the skills that I develop, when I get it, I say, wow, look who I've become in the process. And you feel so good. There's nothing like that.
But that's a mindset that we're not teaching nearly as much as we should. And it's a mindset, pure and simple, to approach life that way.
Right. Yeah. And that's what makes what you and I are doing in our day, in our time right now. That's what makes it so valuable. And that's why, this podcast, what you're doing now, what a phenomenal way to reach out to people so that they can begin absorbing some of these things, because the things, we're talking about, that's not taught in the schools.
Not at all. And if it were, parents would hit the roof.
Yeah, right. It's because they'd become more responsible than they want to be.
Yeah, there are some great parents out there, but there are a lot of parents who just didn't really get it or don't get it. And I understand that there isn't really a manual about how to be a parent, especially how to develop the appropriate mindsets. But the information is there if people look for it. Again, it's a matter of taking time each day to look at your day. And if one of the things that I tell people regularly is, look, take time at the end of the day, talk about what in your mind, what worked, what didn't work. And I don't even like to deal with it in terms of failure, because I think that has such a horrible connotation, although it doesn't need to. But think about the things that didn't work. Why didn't they work? What do you do next time? And that's always, of course, the issue. Do you learn from things that were your mistakes? And I once heard someone say, when we talk about mistakes that people make, it wasn't a mistake when you did it. It was a mistake after the fact when you realized that something wasn't right, which is really part of the whole issue. So making a mistake, as it were, if you go back and look at it and say, all right, so that wasn't quite right. What do I do next time? That's the real issue. What do we learn?
Sure. Mistakes are just course corrections.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it is. What do they say? I mean, failure isn't failure unless you don't learn from it.
Right.
And learn that's a part of the process. And that see, a lot of people, they try to avoid problems. I tell you how to look for problems.
Yeah.
When's the last time you ever grew or developed or created or did something, accomplished something, or developed a skill or a habit without overcoming a problem?
Yep.
I mean, so if the more problems you overcome, the more valuable you become.
Well, and in part, the more valuable you become to yourself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's great. There's the old story about this guy. I had worked in an industrial supply company for a short time, while I was getting my nutrition business started. And, and they have on-site mechanics at these manufacturing companies. But if something goes wrong and one of their machines goes down, then they have to call in an outside specialist. And when that would happen, because if a machine's down, it can cost a company $20,000 an hour for the lack of productivity from that machine.
Right.
And so they bring this guy in, and the guy comes in. He says, "Tell me the situation." He says, "Okay." He walks over. He grabs a little ball peen hammer and walks over this certain part of the machine. He goes bam, 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 pounds on the machine, goes over there, flips the switch, and the machine goes on. And the guy says, "Dang," he says, "that's amazing." And the guy says, "No problem." He says, "Here's your bill, $10,000. He said, $10,000? You haven't been here 10 minutes. And he said, No. He said, the visit was for free. He says, knowing where to hit the machine with a hammer, that's what cost you $10,000.
Yeah.
He had been there before.
Yeah. It's amazing. When I was selling and managing the sales force, and we were selling to financial firms, same concept, but they did something to make sure it really didn't happen. That is to say, they had backup systems elsewhere. So like Solomon Brothers had their facility in New York, they had a facility in New Jersey, and they had 2 complete backup trading floors down in Florida.
Oh.
And I asked one of their people once, why in Florida where all the hurricanes are? Well, first of all, they're underground. And there are 2, because if one fails, at least there'll be another one. And you can only prepare so much. But if our system goes down, we lose like $5 million a minute. So they have done so much to make sure that they don't have downtime. And then the other part of it is what we sold were the products that people used to back up their data to then put it on tape so that it could be in all of those facilities, so that if something happened, then they would be able to deal with it. Well, what happened on September 11th? Trading floors in the World Trade Center were lost. I remember Morgan Stanley on a Friday night, after September 11th, they found a facility, I think over in Jersey City or in Hoboken, a room the size of a football field, as they describe it. And they decided that's where they were going to set up their trading floor. And they got all their backup material that they had gotten from on tape from us. So they got their tapes that had been stored in New Jersey or elsewhere. And they went to their partners who sold them technology like IBM, and they got new computers, which included IBM taking computers off employees' desks just to get it into these guys. Wow. Anyway, they got everything together, and from Friday night to Sunday afternoon, they completely rebuilt the trading floor so that by the evening of Sunday, the 16th of September, they were ready to open as if nothing happened on September 11th.
Wow, isn't that amazing? Man, preparation.
It's preparation.
Yeah.
Well, how do you deal with, difficult situations and failures and so on before maybe you're successful, and then how do you deal with them afterward?
Well, it's and you might as well be ready for them. Okay, because there's one thing for sure. We know that any kind of, it's not if a problem is going to occur. It's when the problems occur. So they're inevitable, and they're going to come. And the thing is there's a variableness to them, right? They vary in intensity and time and length and degree of hardship and so forth. And but the thing is that they're also profitable. We can learn from them. And so we've just got to learn. I said, okay, so it's kind of like we were talking about. Okay, this is what happened, course correction, what went wrong, what did we do right, how did this occur, how can it happen? So it's definitely an educational, it's the learning time. And so here's what's interesting, but the key, I think, in dealing with the difficulties that we encounter is to not spend as much time thinking about the things that are out of my control, but what's in my control. And not so concerned with what's really happened, what's changed, because when we encounter these different things change. It could be the economy changes, the government changes, technology changes, and there's all kinds of different changes that take place. But we got to look at what hasn't changed. Mike, when in 1985, our company went through a huge crash. We were radically attacked by the government. People were getting radical results on our products. And the pharmaceutical industry, which obviously they didn't like what we did. Our understanding is that they probably, based on our business model and what the people that we helped deal with health issues, we estimated they probably lost $500 million in 1984 because of us. So the pharmaceutical industry, they went to the AMA, and the AMA went to the FDA, and they said, hey, they got to have drugs in those products. People can't get that kind of health results without the drugs, And so they came after us. And our company went from 94 million a month down to 10 million a month, or 8 million a month. And so it was a radical crash. My income at that point in time went from over $40,000 a month down to $5,800 a month in 2 months. The crash hit March 8th. I had just signed the mortgage, just closed escrow on the mortgage of my first $1 million home. Okay. I closed escrow on March 1st. The crash hit March 8th. I hadn't even made my first mortgage payment, and my income dropped 86% in 2 months. So what am I going to do? Well, this is when your philosophy, this is when you see the reality of your philosophy. Does it really play out? And so I just started thinking, I said, okay, I've got to ask myself the question that I ask other people when they're going through things. And I said, okay, I see what's changed, but I got to ask myself what hasn't changed. And I said, okay, my product hasn't changed. My plan hasn't changed. The vision hasn't changed. The dream hasn't changed. My values haven't changed. My efforts haven't changed. And I haven't changed. My purpose hasn't changed. So none of that had changed. So all I had to do is say, okay, how do I take all the things that haven't changed and work to create the things that I need to resolve from what has changed?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what made the difference for me. And so, it took me, a good year to kind of get things back up rolling again. And it took another 5 years to get it back to really normal. But the thing was, we lost a huge percentage of people quit. Mm-hmm. And that was the one thing I didn't do. I didn't quit. I was loyal to the cause. I was loyal to the company. I was loyal to the difference that I was made and loyal to my customers. And so, it happened. And so that's the kind of thing that, will get us out of situations. It's just like the Apollo 13 mission. What an amazing illustration.
Yeah.
We remember, they were heading to the moon and they had the explosion. They couldn't go to the moon, but they had to go around the moon in order to get because you can't put it in reverse, right?
Right.
So they're doing that. Now, of course, their damaged space capsule, they had things that they needed and say they had to get into the little limb in order to survive. And ultimately, the space commander, says, okay, we have got to fix the problem on the spacecraft. And so what they did is they took a table and they took everything that they had that they knew was on the spacecraft, and they laid it on the table. And says, gentlemen, we need to create an item so that we can put a square peg in a round hole. And everything that's on the table, this is what we have. We have to take what we do have, create what we don't have. And by the way, we've got about 13 hours to get it done, or we have 3 dead astronauts. Well, needless to say, they made it done. They did.
Yeah.
They created what they needed, what they didn't have, and from what they needed from what they didn't have.
So here's the real question, given your story, what changed? You talked about the things that didn't change. What really changed?
Only the circumstances. The mindset is what stayed the same.
Mm-hmm. And what happened so that everyone came down on you, and obviously a lot of people quit? What happened with all the investigations?
The irony of the whole thing is a year and a half later, they said, oh, you're all good. That's not a problem. In fact, because we did such a thorough analysis on your products and what you're doing, you can actually say more about the products after the investigation than you could before the investigation. And that's why we had the investigation. So we actually got more things we could say about the products afterwards. Yeah. And that's why they attacked us.
And that's my point, right? So exactly. In a sense, nothing really changed other than things that you didn't have any control over, and you kept your sights set on the things that you could control. And that's really, of course, the real issue. Exactly.
That's exactly it, Mike. And that's what we have to understand. And that's just another illustration where things happen for us, not to us. That solidified our products, and nobody's been able to touch our products since.
There you are.
I mean, all of that solidified our products for the next 40 years.
Yeah. So you wrote a book on leadership. What are the basic things that you teach in that? What are maybe the top 3 principles that you teach?
Well, it's really more about developing ourselves. It's called maximizing you. And because my thinking is this: if we can build people, people can build a business. Business doesn't build itself. People build a business. So if I can build people and teach them how to maximize their talents, skills, abilities, and attitudes and habits, then they can do amazing things. And so what I did is I kind of did a review of, the previous 40 years. And I said, what are the half a dozen things that made the difference? And the half a dozen things that made the difference for me are the 6 sections in the book. And the first section deals with purpose, because, you've got to have a purpose. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? And, so we've got to have a purpose. And then from our purpose, once we understand what our purpose is, what am I here for? What am I in business for? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? Then comes personal development. In other words, I have got to become the person necessary to do all those things. And that's why I say that when we accomplish something, when we overcome obstacles, it's because of who we've become. So what we've accomplished is one thing, but who we've become is an entire other thing, because that's with me for the rest of my life. And in order to do that, the third section is mindset. In other words, I've got to have a mindset that's going to enable me to endure. Okay, that's where I've got to realize, listen, thoughts control my mind, but I control my thoughts. So therefore, I get to determine what I read, what I see, what I hear, what I experience. And those are the things that will determine what I do. And what I do, my actions on a consistent basis will create habits. Habits on a consistent basis will create an attitude. And an attitude on a consistent basis creates my character. And that's what we look for. That's what we're lacking so much in our culture today. And then from that, then we need people skills, because I think it's the most valuable asset that we have. is our people skills. For the most part, when we encounter problems, generally our problems aren't as much with things as is with people, personalities. And so if we can develop people skills and learn to empower people and develop people and equip people, then we can accomplish a lot of things. And so when we encounter problems with people, here's what I discovered, Mike. People are generally the biggest problem. But here's the irony of it. People are also the biggest solution.
Mm-hmm.
So what I got to do is I just got to find people who have been there before. And this is why mentors are so important in our lives. And I've got 5 mentors that really is the foundation of the book, the principles that they taught me. And so, so we develop those things. And once we've got that, then we can really make a difference. And then that, fine tuning our people skills and accomplishing these things, that's where the leadership comes from. Again, that's leader. A leader is really just somebody who knows what's next, why it's important, and then how to take the current resources to solve the problems at hand. So if I can get that, and that's something you can teach people, okay? This is why everybody can be a leader. They just need to know what's next. Okay, why is that important? Okay, great. So now you've got the why, you've got a bit of your purpose, your reasoning. Okay, now what are the resources that you have to create what you don't have? And then we develop and we grow and we build. And so that's where the leadership comes in. But the hard part, we talked about a little bit earlier, if you reach the goal and miss the objective, and that's the balance. So then we need to keep the balance. So I have my purpose, okay? And then I need to become the person to fulfill that purpose. I need to get my mindset so I stay the course. And then I've got to develop the people to help me get there, because none of us get there alone, right? And then the leadership skills is just bringing other people with me. Again, not what I do, but what others do as a result of what I do. And then once I've got there, I just got to make sure that I keep my life in balance so that I get to enjoy it all. Otherwise, I just become if I'm just a workaholic, then I don't get to enjoy the value of what I've created. And so we want to have a balance in our life.
Which makes a lot of sense. But how do you pass on all of that, or how do you teach your team members and incent them and then get them to the point where they go out and do what you did and do what you do? And of course, it may be different, but how do you get them to that point?
Well, I think that's where the work comes in. A lot of people say, how come you quit recruiting 10 years ago? And I said, because I know how much work it is. You don't just give people information, it's a relationship, where we're involved with transformation is what we want. And that's not just materials and knowledge, it's relationship. It's men and women is what we're doing. And that's why I say I want to build people. And so when I'm dealing with my guys and trying to help them to grow, I remind them of their why. Why are you doing this? Why is it important to you? What is it that you want to accomplish from it? So you've got to remind them of their why, their purpose, their goals, what it is that they're trying to accomplish, what they want out of it, what's it going to look like. And then we need to be able to help them and say, okay, what's the next step you've got to do? A problem with a lot of people getting defeated is, they look to the goal, to the end result, and they go, oh, that's so far away. Oh gosh, it's just too far away. No. Keep your eye, look on the goal so you see where you're going, but then say, what's next? And so I need to remind them, okay, listen, don't worry about that right now. Let's just get you to the next step. Okay, you're an employee. Okay, let's get you to supervisor. Okay, now you're a supervisor. Okay, good. Now, okay, let's go from supervisor. Okay, now let's make you, a department manager. Okay, now let's make you a floor manager. Okay, now let's put you into the executive, staff. And then, so you kind of gradually go. So we just need to let them know what's the next step. And then one of the key questions that's been valuable for me to help my team, just to make sure that I'm on track with what they want after going through these things, is to say, okay, let me ask you something, because we've got to take the resources, that we have in order to accomplish the next step. So the question is what do you need to know in order to do what you've got to do? See, because sometimes we think we know what they need to know.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, why waste all time giving them information that they don't need? Why not just say, hey, listen, tell me what you need to know to do what you got to do. I'll teach you that. See, it helps me to zero in on the refining process so we can give them the talent, skills, or the information or details that they need. So when we just do that and work with them and encourage them, and make sure that we're always pointing out what people do right. It's so sad that so many times people want to point out what somebody's doing wrong. Listen, people know what they're doing wrong for the most part. And they may not know what, but they know something's wrong. So I want to point out what they're doing right. I want to help them to develop their strengths. Mike, listen, I'm so weak in so many areas, but I'm strong in a few areas. My strength overrides all my weaknesses. My strengths make my weaknesses irrelevant because I'll delegate those. That's what we're talking about when we started the call, right? And delegate people to take care of my weaknesses. And that's why we need everybody. That's why we need, Jim Rohn always said, each of us need all of us, and all of us need each of us, because each of us have different talents, skills, gifts, and abilities that the other doesn't have.
Yeah.
Each of us that was seen different things, heard different things, read different things, experienced different things. So everybody is unique, which allows them to be able to contribute from a unique perspective. And so we need people. And that's why I say that people are your biggest problems, but they're also your biggest solutions. And so that's just been real valuable, for me to be able to just do those type of things, know their why, know what's next, what do you need to know, and then point out their strengths and point out what they're doing right. Catch it, Ken Blanchard in the 1 Minute Manager, he says, make it a practice to catch somebody doing something right.
Yeah.
And, listen, Mike, I talk to people when I've done some events with the top 1% in our industry. Okay. These are the major money earners. These are the top 1%ers. And I'll ask them, and especially if there's everybody else in the background, all the 1%ers are up front. And I tell the audience in the back, I said, you guys just close your ears for a minute. I got to talk to the 1%ers here for a minute. And I'll ask them, I say, hey, let me ask you guys something. Is there anybody down here who's been encouraged too much lately? Is there anybody who can say, no more encouragement. I've had too much. I've had my daily dose. No more encouragement. Please, no more. Has anybody ever had too much encouragement? And I like, just raise your hands. And then I tell the audience, everybody in the back, the new people, I said, hey, did you see this? Not one person raised their hands. If the top 1%, if we need encouragement, what does that say for everybody on our teams?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be master encouragers.
What's the key to encouragement?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's a belief in the person. When I first went up to get some training by Mark, I went through my old training deal, the assignment that he gave me, and he said, man, then he says, that's great. He says, you got to open up Orange County. And I said, open up Orange County? Mark, I'm trying to figure out how to open up the front door. What do you mean open up Orange County and start a new business there? He said, no. He said, you can do it. Mike, he believed in me more than I believed in me. And I thought, man, if you think so. And so we got together and we did it. We did it because the belief that he had in me, And I think another thing is just to give them hope. Give people hope. In other words, tell them the stories of other people who have been there before, who started off worse than they are, with less than they have, and made it happen. Those stories, they give us hope. They say, wow, if they can do it, then maybe I can do it too. See? And so that's so valuable. And then another thing that I do throughout, just for when these times come up, I always encourage my guys to make a positive progress list. You talked about it earlier, but I think before we got on the call here, the idea of just jotting things down, that I've succeeded at. What went well today? How things go well this week? How about this month? How about this quarter? How about this year? What went well? What worked right? What did better than I expected? And then keep a positive progress list. Anything you've made progress on, anything that you've succeeded on, go back for as long as you can remember and write down everything you can think of. And then when we come up to those times that are down, when we get in a valley, we say, hey, open up your progress list and read through it and know that you're going to come out of this. The old saying is, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, right? But what people need to hear and see in that phrase, it says, walk through the valley.
And the other part of it is,
you walk through it.
And the other part of it is, I will fear no evil, which is the other aspect of it, is that you need to know you can walk through and not fear evil.
That's right. So those are just little simple tricks that I think anybody can do that, can help them.
Well, and I think that they make perfect sense. If people want to, can they reach out to you? And do you coach people? Do you strictly stick within Herbalife or what?
No, actually, I set up a new business last year, Maximize You. And
sounds like a book title to me.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I just hold up a copy. This is my book.
Yeah, of course.
And, it's Maximizing You. And you can find it on Amazon, but you can go to maximizeyou.com and you can see examples of things that I've done, and you can reach out to me there. I love coaching. I guess I call it mentoring. It's more of a situation, but similar, in a sense. There are differences. There's definite differences, but, so I'm more on the mentoring side, the relational side. And, so I love that. I love talking to small crowds. I love doing weekend retreats. I love doing keynote messages, panels, anything where I can get in front of an audience to say, hey, something, success isn't as difficult as you may think.
Yeah.
You can do it, and I'd love to point you in the right direction.
Well, there you go. And I hope people will reach out. You are inspiring, and I mean that in a very positive and in a very truthful way, in a very absolute way, that you are inspiring. But more important than that, you are down to earth. You provide a lot of good things that we all should take to heart, and I hope people will. So I really do hope people will reach out to you and try to spend some time with you, which is a good thing to do. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us today out there. Wherever you are, as always, I ask for a 5-star rating. I would appreciate it if you would do that, as well as providing us your input and your thoughts, things that you'd like to hear or know about. Feel free to email me, Michael H.I., MICHAELHI, at accessibe.com. Or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is MICHAELHINGSON. So michaelhingson.com/podcast. And again, love those 5-star ratings. This has been absolutely one of the most fun, I think, and inspiring, and for me, educational and down to earth episodes that we've ever done. And Dennis, I really want to thank you for making that happen and being here with us and doing all the things that you have done to make it possible for us to be here and do this today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike. What a great joy to be here and just to have encountered you and to go through your story. Talk about inspiration. I mean, what a tremendous joy and so entertaining. And folks, if you ever need a keynote, here's another guy right here. I'll tell you, he will keep you laughing in the aisles with humor and rolling in your mind with conviction, so I mean, very, very powerful. Thanks for the great opportunity, Mike.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I haven't convinced Dennis yet to get me to speak at an Herbalife convention, but we'll have to work on that. But that's another story. And Dennis, of course, you're always welcome to come back. We'd love to have you come back and spend some more time with us.
Great. What a joy. Thanks so much, Mike.